You ever feel like you're putting in the hours, reading, maybe highlighting like crazy, but the information just uh, vanishes, like trying to fill a leaky bucket?
Oh, absolutely. Happens all the time.
Yeah, so we're tackling that head on today. We're not just scratching the surface, we're really diving deep into the actual science of how we learn.
Exactly. Forget the generic advice. We've gone through a bunch of research on evidence-based learning techniques, found a pretty comprehensive overview, actually.
Okay.
And our mission really is to pull out the core stuff, the most effective research-backed methods for really getting and remembering information without feeling totally overwhelmed. Think of it like a shortcut, but a scientifically sound one.
An intelligence upgrade. I like that. So this isn't just theory, right? These are practical strategies.
Totally practical. They've been tested in fields like, intense medical training, learning languages, even professional skills training. Real world stuff.
Okay, let's unpack this then. Where do we start? What gives us the biggest bang for our learning buck?
Well, if you're looking for the foundations, the really robust stuff, spaced repetition and retrieval practice are definitely where the research points. They're fundamental.
Why fundamental?
Because they just line up so well with how our memory actually works best. It's all about revisiting things strategically and actively pulling information out of your brain.
So it's not just about how long you study, but how you spread it out and actually try to remember it.
Precisely.
Yeah.
You swap passive rereading for actively digging into your memory. And the research, it shows that increasing the total time, the total spacing between retrieval attempts, can boost long-term retention by up to, get this, 200%.
200%.
Seriously.
Right.
And what's really interesting is that the pattern of the spacing, whether the gaps get bigger, stay the same, or even shrink, doesn't seem to matter as much as the overall time spread out.
Wow.
Yeah, just forcing yourself to recall stuff at increasing intervals. It's not about cramming, it's strategic remembering.
200%. That's not just a little bit better, that's huge. What's the cognitive science behind that?
It boils down to two core principles. There's the spacing effect. Our brains learn better when study sessions are spread out. And then there's the testing effect.
The testing effect.
Yeah, the simple act of trying to retrieve information actually strengthens the memory itself. It's like exercising a muscle, basically.
Yeah.
The more you actively use it, the stronger it gets.
Okay, that makes intuitive sense. But how does this look in practice? Like real-world example?
Oh, medical education is a great place to look. Take Anki. It's a digital flashcard app based on spaced repetition.
I've heard of that.
Right. So one study compared med students, and the ones who consistently used Anki, they scored way higher on exams. We're talking improvements of nearly 13% on some really critical standardized tests.
13% is significant in that context.
Absolutely. The key is actively using those flashcards at those spaced intervals. It turns passive review into active memory building.
So challenging your memory regularly makes a real difference, especially when the stakes are high. What about language learning? Does it work there too?
Definitely. Spaced repetition is super effective for vocabulary and grammar. There's software like Nemothene, which uses these algorithms, and studies show it really boosts retention of new language stuff.
So it's about repeated exposure, but active recall exposure.
Exactly. Often paired with, images or context clues to force you to actively remember.
And even for practical skills, you mentioned professional training, maybe even surgery.
Yep. There was a 6-week simulation course for surgical trainees. They built in spaced repetition, and it led to measurable improvements in their technical skills, especially for the newer trainees.
How so?
Just regularly revisiting and practicing those skills at spaced intervals really solidified the learning in a practical, hands-on way.
And nowadays, I guess digital tools make this whole process much easier to manage.
Oh, for sure. Nobody's expecting you to carry huge boxes of index cards anymore. Tools like EuroAnki, that's a free flashcard deck for urology residents, show this perfectly. Junior doctors using it said they felt way better prepared, less stressed about forgetting things.
Less stressed. That's a big one.
Huge. And they even ranked it as their most valuable resource for learning the basics of urology. Better recall and less stress. That's a win-win.
Definitely sounds like it. And technology keeps evolving, right? Pushing this further.
Absolutely. There's even really cool research looking into AI generating personalized mnemonics like memory aids and integrating them with Anki for language learning.
AI-generated mnemonics. Wow.
Yeah, and the early results suggest that learners using these AI mnemonics showed even better vocabulary retention. It's a fascinating look at where personalized learning might be heading.
So the big takeaway here is that spaced repetition and retrieval practice are powerful because they just work with our brains, not against them.
Exactly. They leverage our natural memory mechanisms.
Okay, so spacing things out and actively recalling is key for long-term memory. Got it. But what about when you first encounter something new? How do you make that initial learning more effective?
Right. That leads us straight into active learning and other important cognitive strategies. The big shift here is moving away from just passively taking information in like reading or listening to actually engaging with it, making your brain work.
So less being a sponge, more like wrestling with the ideas.
That's a good way to put it. The core idea is evidence-based teaching using methods that research has actually shown to work. Active learning is one, but it also includes things like cooperative learning, problem-based learning, flipped classrooms, that kind of stuff.
And this active approach is maybe more critical in certain subjects, science, for example.
For sure. In science education, research shows focusing on the underlying structure and function of knowledge, like the big picture, how things fit together, is way more effective than just memorizing facts or formulas one by one.
Structure and function.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. And providing clear guidelines, ways for students to check their own understanding, getting quick feedback, all that's vital for building problem-solving skills. And interestingly, just sticking students in groups isn't the magic bullet.
Yeah.
The group work needs structure, those supportive elements, to really be effective. It's not just proximity.
So it's about smarter effort, not just more effort. You also mentioned metacognitive strategies. What's that about?
Metacognition. It's basically thinking about your own thinking.
Okay.
It's being aware of how you learn, what strategies you're using, and then being able to control or adjust them. There was research on language learners using mobile apps,
Uh-huh.
and it found that while many used basic strategies, the learners who also used metacognitive strategies, like planning their study time or evaluating, did I really understand that?
Yeah.
They tended to do better.
So cognitive strategies are the what you do, metacognitive is the how you manage the what.
Exactly. It's about being more intentional, more strategic about the whole learning process itself.
And we see this active engagement paying off elsewhere, too.
Yeah, absolutely. In math, for instance, one study used a simple, non-digital card game to teach some complex ideas.
A card game.
Yep. And the students who played the game scored significantly higher on tests compared to those who got the standard lecture-style instruction. It just shows how active participation, even something fun like a game, can lead to deeper understanding.
Makes learning active and maybe more enjoyable. You also mentioned curiosity earlier. How does that fit in?
Curiosity is a really powerful internal driver. There was a big review looking at curiosity in science learning.
Okay.
And it found that when you're curious, your brain is basically primed to learn. It's more receptive, encodes information better, remembers it longer. Plus, it boosts motivation, makes you want to explore.
So feeling curious actually changes how your brain processes information.
It seems so. The data suggests curiosity-driven learning really amps up attention and the whole learning process, leading to much better outcomes. We're talking studies showing big jumps in engagement and learning results when curiosity is deliberately sparked.
So that little, I wonder why feeling can actually unlock deeper learning.
Precisely. Teaching approaches that intentionally tap into that curiosity can make a huge difference in how engaged learners are and how much they actually learn.
Okay, we've got these powerful cognitive techniques. Now, how does technology fit in? It feels like digital tools are everywhere in learning now.
Oh, absolutely. Technology is a massive enabler. It gives us so many platforms and tools to actually implement these evidence-based principles effectively.
Right. Let's talk virtual and augmented reality environments first, seeing a lot more of those, especially in science.
Yeah, virtual labs are a great example. They started out as like supplements to physical labs, but now sometimes they're the main tool.
What are the benefits?
Well, accessibility is huge, flexibility too. And crucially, they can really facilitate active learning. Simulating experiments digitally lets students explore, test things out. It can boost inquiry-based learning and deepen understanding of tricky concepts.
But there must be downsides too, challenges.
Oh, sure. The initial setup cost can be high. And you need to think about making sure everyone have access, overcoming tech hurdles for some people. Plus, integrating them smoothly into the curriculum takes effort.
So potential, but needs careful thought.
Exactly. When done well, they're a powerful addition. Maybe not always a complete replacement, but powerful.
What about mobile learning, like language apps on your phone? Everyone seems to use those.
Mobile tech, especially language learning apps, yeah, they've totally changed the game for language acquisition. Research shows the common methods they use.
Like what?
Things like spaced repetition, obviously, but also getting feedback through different senses, learning words in context, adding game elements. All these things are shown to help with vocabulary, understanding meaning, actually using the language correctly, and even just keeping learners motivated.
And then there's micro-learning, that idea of learning in tiny chunks.
Right. Microlearning focuses on delivering content in these small, really focused units. It gets around the issue of long, potentially boring sessions, boosts flexibility, makes learning easier to fit in, and helps retention.
How does it help retention?
Well, partly through cognitive load theory, the idea that our working memory can only handle so much at once. Small chunks are easier to process. And often, microlearning platforms build in, guess what? Spaced repetition.
Ah, it always comes back to spacing.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Studies often show microlearning keeps people more engaged too, especially with multimedia and interactive bits.
So, fitting learning into busy lives, bite-sized, repeated exposure, makes sense. What about gamification? Making learning into a game sounds fun, but does it work?
It definitely can. When it's designed well, gamification is a really effective way to boost engagement and motivation.
How so?
It uses game mechanics, challenges, points, leaderboards, maybe collaboration, to make learning feel less like a chore and encourage people to get more involved. Learner-focused gamified approaches often lead to better learning outcomes.
Are there frameworks for designing these educational games properly?
Yeah, there are. Like one called RADSIM was developed for cybersecurity training games. It pulls in principles from psychology, behavior studies, learning theory. The goal is to make games that aren't just fun, but actually lead to real knowledge sticking.
And that applies beyond cybersecurity.
Yeah, the principles are pretty general. We've even seen studies showing things like gamified flip books, helping elementary kids get more engaged in math and learn collaboratively.
So technology is a powerful tool, but it's not magic. It's about how you use it to apply these learning principles.
Exactly that. Just throwing tech at something doesn't guarantee better learning. It's the thoughtful application of research-backed methods using technology that makes the real difference.
Right. So it's clearly not a one-size-fits-all deal. How did these techniques need to be tweaked for different subjects, different goals?
Yeah, adaptation is absolutely key. Take medical education again. Teaching something really complex like pathology, especially if it's remote learning.
Yeah.
You have to think carefully about cognitive load, making sure students hit competencies, maybe using peer learning, flipped classrooms.
So the core principles still apply, but the how changes.
Precisely. Active recall, spaced repetition still vital. But how you implement them has to fit the specific challenges of pathology. Same for math if the goal is critical thinking, not just memorization. You need teaching methods that actively engage students with the underlying concepts.
And what about the learners themselves? We're all different, right? Different backgrounds, maybe different ways we like to learn.
That's a super important point. Think about transitioning to university. Often, the study habits that worked before aren't enough. That's where evidence-based strategies like retrieval practice, active learning, and even fostering a growth mindset, believing you can get smarter, really help students adapt to that more independent learning environment.
So supporting the learner to use these strategies is important too.
Definitely. There are even academic tutoring programs, like for med students, designed specifically to teach these strategies. And they show positive impacts on time management, learning effectiveness, confidence, even well-being.
So empowering the learner is part of it. What about mixing and matching these techniques? Is combining them a good idea?
Oh, absolutely. Often, the most effective approach is using a strategic blend. There was a study on an online medical terminology course.
Yeah.
They modified it to include more real-world language use, more interaction and feedback, regular retrieval practice, and chances for students to think about their own learning, that metacognition piece.
And the result?
Significantly higher course grades, and students were happier with the course compared to a more traditional version. It was the combination of these different evidence-backed strategies that made the difference.
That makes total sense. It's like having a toolbox. You pick the right tools for the job, maybe use a few together. Okay, now, even with all this positive research, there have to be limitations, right? Areas where we need to know more.
Yes, definitely. It's crucial to be realistic. The research is ongoing, and there are absolutely gaps and limitations in what we know for sure.
Like what kind of methodological issues?
Well, sometimes studies have, small groups of participants, or they aren't randomly assigned, which makes it harder to say for sure the results apply to everyone. That surgical skills research using spaced repetition sometimes faces those kinds of limits.
Okay.
And while we know tools like Anki work overall, some research hasn't found a clear link between exactly how someone uses Anki, like how many cards they do per day, and their actual exam scores. Suggests other factors matter too, beyond just using the tool itself.
Right. It's not just the tool, but how you fit it into everything else.
Right.
And we mentioned practical barriers earlier, too, for things like virtual labs.
Exactly. Those initial costs for virtual labs, making sure the tech works for everyone, fitting them into the school day or curriculum, those are real hurdles.
Well,
Same for microlearning, keeping learners engaged over time. The costs, tech access, they're practical things to consider.
so where's the research heading? What are the next big questions people are trying to answer?
There are quite a few interesting directions. With curiosity, for example, researchers want better ways to actually measure it accurately, and they need longer-term studies to see how it really affects learning over years.
Okay.
For spaced repetition, even though we know it works, bigger studies across multiple universities or schools could help figure out the absolute best ways to use it in different situations.
Fine-tuning the application.
Yeah, and there's interest in really quantifying the long-term impact of specific programs, like those anatomy electives using spaced repetition.
Mhm.
Do they really help years later on major professional exams? We need more data on that.
So it sounds like we've got a really solid foundation, but the picture is still being filled in, refining what we know.
That's a good way to put it.
Okay, so let's bring this all together. If there's one main message you want people listening to take away from this deep dive, what would it be?
I think the key takeaway is that there's a ton of solid research backing up specific ways to learn better and remember more. Techniques like spaced repetition and retrieval practice. They're consistently shown to be really, really effective for long-term memory.
Yeah, those two definitely stand out. But it's not just them, right? Actively engaging, thinking about how you learn metacognition, even sparking your own curiosity. Those are all powerful tools, too.
Absolutely. And technologies is this incredible facilitator, giving us tools for virtual labs, language apps, interactive games, all sorts of ways to apply these methods.
But, and this seems important, it's not magic. How effective they are really depends on how you use them in the specific situation. Adapting them, maybe combining them. That seems to be the smartest approach.
Precisely. There are still questions and practical hurdles, no doubt, but the evidence is really strong. If you understand and apply these principles, you can become a much more effective, much more efficient learner.
So, for you listening right now, maybe think about this. Which of these techniques kind of clicked with you? Which one could you maybe try out next time you need to learn something? How can knowing this science actually empower you to take charge of your own learning?
Yeah, definitely worth exploring.
We hope this gives you some food for thought. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Thank you so much for listening to the Learning Mindset Podcast. My name is Frank. You can find me over on YouTube on the channel Learning and Technology with Frank, where I look at topics on how we can learn and teach more effectively with technology. You can see my blog over at Summit Tech Academy, where I write about topics related to learning and technology. And of course, stay tuned and subscribe for more episodes here of the podcast. Again, thank you so much for listening. We'll see you in the next episode.